Imagine for a second that you're sleeping soundly at the bottom of a small wooden boat,
Okay.
and a literal hurricane is threatening to completely sink it. I mean, water is crashing over the sides, everyone around you is screaming in absolute panic, and you were just...
You're just taking a nap.
Exactly, you're taking a nap. And today, we're looking at a text that claims taking a nap during a life-threatening crisis isn't, a sign of giving up.
Right.
It's actually the ultimate demonstration of human resilience.
It is, it's a completely counterintuitive image.
Yeah.
But it really gets right to the heart of what we're analyzing today.
Yeah.
Because, we're all dealing with some level of burnout, right?
Yeah.
And we want to know how to not just survive the heavy hits of modern life, but, how to actually construct a framework for real inner fortitude.
And the framework we're looking at today comes from a really fascinating source. We're doing a deep dive into a video transcript from the YouTube channel Black and White Bible.
Yeah, the one titled, Jesus Explained the Secret to Being Resilient and Strong in Life.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is to basically extract the profound mechanics of resilience that are outlined in this text.
Exactly.
And look, whether you are coming to this from a religious background or simply as a student of human psychology, what we're going to explore is how these ancient teachings offer a surprisingly practical blueprint.
A very practical and honestly a highly provocative blueprint for facing the chaos you deal with every single day.
Yeah.
Because that's the real value of analyzing these historical and textual accounts. You can sort of extract a psychological architecture from them.
Right.
The source breaks down resilience into 6 actionable practices, and they're anchored entirely in the life and teachings of Jesus. The text frames him not just as a spiritual leader, but like the ultimate case study in maintaining absolute composure under extreme duress.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the central theme the source proposes right out of the gate, it just completely upends how we usually think about strength.
Oh, totally.
Because normally if you want to be resilient, you think about, gritting your teeth, doubling down.
Full control of your situation.
Exactly. But according to this text, the very foundation of resilience requires a fundamental shift in where you place your trust. It's essentially demanding that you completely relinquish control.
Right. And the text uses this incredibly extreme scenario to set the baseline for this kind of trust. It points to the narrative of Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness.
Wow, yeah.
If we look at this psychologically, he is physically depleted, completely vulnerable. And the text says he's tempted with a basic screaming human necessity, which is to turn these stones into bread.
Right. It's like the ultimate test of physiological panic.
Exactly.
And his response is just wild when you really think about the physical reality of starvation. She basically says, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God.
Yeah.
He actively chooses to rely on an unseen spiritual authority over a desperate, immediate physical need. I mean, he overrides his own biology.
What's fascinating here is how the source defines the mechanics of this true strength. It isn't about having all the resources or the leverage or, the physical power.
Right.
The text actually brings up the classic story of David facing Goliath to really hammer this home.
Oh, right, okay.
When David walks onto that battlefield, he actively rejects conventional armor and weaponry. He doesn't trust his sword. The text explicitly states he trusts in the Lord Almighty.
Wow.
So the psychological takeaway the source is pushing is that true strength requires placing the locus of control outside your own limited, often panicked perspective.
It makes me think of an analogy. Like if you're listening to this and you've ever dealt with a massive career setback or, say, a health scare.
Yeah, those are great examples.
It's like being in the passenger seat of a car driving through thick, blinding fog. Every single human instinct tells you to panic.
You just want to reach over and forcefully grab the steering wheel.
Exactly, because you desperately want to feel like you are in control of your own survival. But grabbing the wheel from the passenger seat is exactly what causes the car to crash.
Right.
You have to trust the driver instead.
That is a perfect visualization of the framework. You're acknowledging that you cannot see the road ahead, but you are actively choosing to trust the one who can.
Yeah.
And the text deepens this concept by bringing up the story of Lazarus. According to the narrative, Jesus receives word that his close friend Lazarus is deathly ill.
Right.
But instead of rushing to heal him, Jesus deliberately waits. He actually allows his friend to die.
Which, on the surface seems incredibly cold.
Exactly. But the source frames this as a masterclass in delayed resolution. By waiting, the text argues, Jesus demonstrates that trusting in a greater, unseen timing yields a result, in this case, resurrection, that is far beyond human comprehension.
Okay, wow.
The source even cites the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31, noting that those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength and soar like eagles. The text is making this profound psychological claim that the waiting period itself is the strengthening process.
It forces you to stop relying on your own frantic timelines.
Precise.
But here is the problem. Sitting in that passenger seat with your hands folded while the car hurtles through the fog,
It's hard.
it's incredibly hard to sustain for more than a few minutes. If you're dealing with a toxic workplace or a lingering illness, how do you maintain that level of trust when the fog just won't lift for days or months or even years?
Right.
The source recognizes this, right? It suggests an active internal tethering mechanism to keep you in that seat.
Yes. If relinquishing control is the foundation, constant prayer is the active practice that sustains it.
Okay.
The source emphasizes that Jesus didn't just casually teach about prayer. He modeled it with this desperate intensity. The text points directly to the Garden of Gethsemane as the prime example.
That scene is so visceral because he knows he's about to be arrested, tortured, crucified. The text says his soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death.
Yeah.
He's experiencing the absolute peak of human anxiety. And what does he do? He doesn't strategize. He doesn't run.
He prays.
3 separate, intense times.
And we have to notice the stark contrast the text sets up here. While Jesus is engaged in this intense internal dialogue, what are his closest disciples doing?
Oh, they're fast asleep. They literally keep nodding off right in the middle of the crisis.
Precisely. And the text draws a direct causal link here. It suggests that because Jesus engaged in this continuous spiritual dialogue, he remained emotionally and spiritually tethered.
He was prepared for the sheer chaos that followed.
Exactly. The disciples, who failed to maintain that connection, immediately succumbed to fatigue, confusion, and panic. They ultimately scattered when the authorities arrived. And the source points out this wasn't a one-off event. It notes that Jesus prayed all night before making major operational decisions, like choosing his 12 disciples. He systematically bypassed hasty human wisdom in favor of seeking external divine guidance.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit, though.
Sure.
Because I'm trying to square this with another example the source uses. To prove that persistent prayer is powerful, the text brings up the parable of the persistent widow and the unjust judge.
Ah, yes.
The widow basically just keeps nagging and bothering this judge until he finally gives in and grants her justice. But if the source claims that God already knows everything and already has this perfect, unshakable master plan,
Why nag him?
yeah, why does the widow have to keep pestering? Why does this text emphasize nagging the creator of the universe?
It's a fantastic tension to point out, honestly. And the source actually addresses the core of this paradox. It frames this kind of constant prayer not merely as a transactional request. It's not like putting a coin into a cosmic vending machine until your preferred outcome drops out. It's framed as an ongoing relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when the text quotes the Apostle Paul saying, "Pray without ceasing," it's describing a continuous recalibration of the mind.
So the persistence isn't about wearing God down.
Exactly. The persistence isn't about changing God's mind. It's about aligning your own psychological state with a higher reality.
Right.
The text notes that Jesus frequently withdrew to solitary places. Even in the midst of adoring crowds and constant demands, he actively sought personal renewal. The persistence in prayer acts as a recalibration tool.
It prevents the internal decay of isolation.
Yes, it keeps you firmly tethered to your source of strength when the daily grind tries to pull you into despair.
Okay, so this internal dialogue acts as an anchor. It keeps you from drifting into panic. But the source warns that internal practices alone aren't enough, right?
Right.
Like, if you just sit in isolation praying, you risk becoming completely disconnected from reality. So to build true structural resilience, the text claims you have to paradoxically turn outward.
This is where the framework becomes beautifully subversive.
Yeah.
In our modern context, when we're burned out, we're told to protect our peace, to set up boundaries, to hoard our remaining energy.
Totally self-care.
Right. But the text pivots sharply. It argues that true resilience actually comes from pouring yourself out in service to others.
The imagery it uses is shocking, honestly. It shows Jesus at the Last Supper, who is the recognized master and lord of this group, taking off his outer clothing, getting down on his hands and knees with a towel, and washing the filthy feet of his disciples.
And the text highlights how Peter is absolutely appalled by this. He tries to refuse.
Because it breaks every social rule.
Every single rule of hierarchy and status in their societal context. It's an act of extreme, intentional humility.
The source also points to the famous feeding of the 5,000 to illustrate this. Jesus is presented with a massive, hungry crowd and severely limited resources, literally just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish.
Right. And the rational, self-preserving instinct would be to hoard those resources, or at least just feed his inner circle.
But instead, he disperses what little he has. He serves.
He trusts that provision will miraculously follow the act of service. And the source explicitly ties this to the teaching in Matthew chapter 25, which states that when you feed the hungry, clothe the needy, or welcome a stranger, you are quite literally serving Christ himself.
To make this incredibly practical for the listener, it's like when you are completely stressed out, spiraling about your own life, your own deadlines, your own perceived failures.
You're stuck in a loop of your own anxiety.
Yes. But then a friend calls, and they're in a crisis. You drop your stuff, you go help them pack boxes to move, or you just sit on their couch and listen to them cry. And suddenly, your own massive anxieties actually feel smaller.
Right.
You leave their house feeling strangely stronger.
Yeah. You've hit on the exact psychological mechanism the text is describing. Serving acts as an immediate pattern interrupt.
Pattern interrupt, I like that.
It violently shifts our focus away from our own internal difficulties and forces empathy. By attending to the needs of others, we actually break the neurological loop of our own anxiety.
Wow.
Furthermore, the text argues that sincere service done without expecting external validation, social media likes, or immediate reciprocity builds a structural resilience.
Yeah.
It develops a strength of character that the world simply cannot offer or take away.
That makes total sense for daily, grinding stress. Serving grounds you. But what happens when a sudden, terrifying crisis hits?
Like what?
A moment where you don't have time to go serve at a soup kitchen. You don't have time to process, and the ground just instantly falls out from under you.
Yeah.
A sudden diagnosis, a massive layoff that requires something much sharper.
Right. This is where the foundational trust, the prayer, and the service are put to the ultimate stress test. The text pivots to how we handle acute, immediate threats. And this brings us back to the image we started with, the storm on the Sea of Galilee.
Right. The boat.
Jesus and his disciples are in a boat. A massive, violent storm hits out of nowhere. The waves are crashing over the sides. The boat is actively taking on water, and Jesus is literally asleep on a cushion.
And the disciples are terrified, which honestly is a perfectly rational response.
Oh, absolutely. They wake him up shouting, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." And according to the text, Jesus wakes up, rebukes them for their lack of faith, and then commands the storm to calm down.
Okay, I have to jump in with a very real human pushback here.
Go for it.
Because it's so easy for us to sit in a dry room with microphones and say, just have faith.
Yeah.
But if you are those disciples, and you were in a literal sinking boat in the middle of a dark sea, waking up the one guy who was napping seems like the most logical, practical, necessary move you could possibly make.
It does seem that way.
How is that a lack of faith?
If we connect this to the bigger picture the text is painting, we see that the source defines faith very differently than we usually do.
How so?
It does not define faith as some abstract, warm feeling you have when the sun is shining. Faith is defined as active, unshakable trust in a power greater than the immediate threat.
Right.
Jesus' peaceful sleep wasn't ignorance of the storm. It was absolute certainty in a sovereign architecture that superseded the storm.
So it's about what you're anchoring to.
Precisely. The text pairs this with the story of the woman with the issue of blood. She suffered from a severe hemorrhage for 12 years.
12 years, wow.
She spent all her money on doctors and only grew worse. She is at the absolute end of her rope. But she believed if she could just reach through the crowd and touch the edge of Jesus' garment, she would be healed.
And the text says the moment she touched it, she was healed. Jesus turns to her and says, your faith has healed you.
The source uses the metaphor of the mustard seed to explain this mechanism. Jesus says faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. The profound analytical takeaway here is that it's not the sheer volume or the perfection of your faith that matters, it's the object of your faith. Even a tiny, fragile, desperate amount of faith, when placed in the right anchor, can withstand the hurricane.
Okay, so having active faith anchors you during a natural storm or a sudden illness, you are fighting the elements. But what if the storm is caused by another human being?
That's a whole different level.
Right. What if the crisis is a deep personal betrayal? That leads us to what I think is the most difficult resilience test the source outlines, which is the demand for wholehearted forgiveness.
It is arguably the most difficult because it requires the ultimate emotional release.
Yeah.
The source presents forgiveness not as a polite suggestion, but as absolutely non-negotiable for maintaining resilience. The ultimate example provided is Jesus on the cross.
It's intense.
He's in the midst of extreme physical agony, facing a gross, humiliating injustice. And the text says he prays for the very people driving the nails into his hands, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
It's staggering to even contemplate. And the source makes it clear this isn't just a one-time heroic act for the history books. It's a daily requirement.
Right.
Like Peter, one of the disciples, asks Jesus if he should forgive someone who wrongs him 7 times, which Peter probably thought was being incredibly generous.
Probably.
And Jesus replies, not 7 times, but 77 times, meaning the posture of forgiveness has to be continuous.
The text also points to the ancient narrative of Joseph. He was literally betrayed and sold into slavery by his own brothers.
That's awful.
He spends years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. But decades later, when he holds absolute power over those same brothers, he forgives them.
Wow.
He realizes that God used their malicious betrayal to orchestrate a greater good, ultimately saving an entire region from famine.
So what does this all mean for us functionally? It makes me think of carrying around a massive, heavy backpack full of rocks.
Oh, I like that visual.
Right. Holding onto resentment, waiting for an apology you might never get, keeping a mental ledger of every time your boss undermines you, that is hiking up a mountain with a backpack full of rocks.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Forgiveness isn't about looking at the rocks and saying, these aren't heavy, or telling the person who hurt you, what you did to me was actually okay. It's about choosing to take the backpack off and drop it, so you can actually walk forward without your knees buckling.
That is precisely the psychological mechanism the text is describing. The source emphasizes that forgiveness is not about ignoring the offense, minimizing the trauma, or justifying the wrong.
Okay.
It is the active, intentional relinquishing of your right to retaliate. The text explains that unforgiveness, bitterness, and anger literally corrode your inner peace.
Yeah, they really do.
They keep your nervous system in a state of constant hypervigilance. They make you a permanent psychological prisoner to the person who hurt you.
Wow. You become a prisoner to the person who betrayed you.
Exactly. Releasing that retaliation frees you from those chains. It's framed by the text not just as a magnanimous favor you do for the betrayer, but as a vital, essential survival mechanism for your own emotional health.
Because you can't carry the rocks forever.
Right. You simply cannot be resilient if you are being eaten alive by bitterness from the inside out.
Taking the backpack off. But here's the catch. If taking off the backpack means letting go of our right to revenge, zooming out even further, it really means letting go of our entire script for how we think our lives should unfold.
That's a scary thought.
It is. We all want justice on our own timeline. We all have a plan. And that perfectly sets up the final overarching concept the source presents.
The one that ties this entire framework together.
Yes. The total acceptance of the master plan.
This is the final surrender, and it is the culmination of the trust, the prayer, the outward service, the act of faith, and the forgiveness we've unpacked. The text takes us right back to the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane to demonstrate this. Jesus prays, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done."
The psychological tension in that single sentence is just incredible.
It really is.
He's fully acknowledging the deep human desire to avoid the pain. He's literally asking for a way out, but he is simultaneously actively submitting to the overarching architecture of the plan.
The source also points to the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his deeply loved son Isaac. I mean, it's a command that defies all human logic and parental instinct.
Oh, absolutely.
Yet Abraham trusts the ultimate incomprehensible plan. And it brings up Job, a man who loses his health, his vast wealth, and his entire family in rapid succession.
And Job's response is, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised."
Right. Job accepts the brutal reality of his profound loss without losing his anchor to the divine, resulting in an unshakable, battle-tested faith.
Okay, but I have to stop and point out a major tension I am seeing in the source material right now.
Okay, what is it?
Earlier, we talked about the persistent widow, who aggressively refuses to accept the judge's first answer.
Yeah.
We talked about having the act of faith to literally command a mountain to move. But now, the source is saying we just have to accept whatever happens.
I see where you're going.
How do you fiercely pray for a mountain to move, but simultaneously accept it if the mountain stays exactly where it is? How do those two conflicting ideas exist in the same framework?
It is the ultimate paradox of this text, but the source actually resolves it beautifully if you look closely at the mechanics.
Now,
It explains that accepting the will of God is absolutely not passive resignation. It isn't throwing your hands up in defeat and saying, well, whatever happens, happens.
so it's not fatalism.
No, not at all. It is the highest form of active faith. I mean, you pray fiercely, you advocate for justice, you step out of the boat and try to walk on the water like Peter did.
But you trust the overarching narrative.
Yes. You trust that the overarching narrative is perfect, even when that narrative involves periods of intense waiting, confusion, or immense pain.
Wow.
The text cites Psalm 27, encouraging believers to wait for the Lord. That waiting isn't empty, it's a crucible for growth. By accepting the master plan, you stop fighting the unchangeable realities of your life.
You surrender your exhausting need to constantly script the universe.
Exactly. And in that profound surrender, you find true, unbreakable resilience.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
Yeah.
So just to quickly recap the journey this ancient text has taken us on today.
Yeah, let's recap.
We started with the terrifying prospect of trusting the unseen driver in the fog. We examined how to maintain that trust through the internal tethering of constant prayer.
Right.
We looked at the subversive paradox of gaining internal strength by pouring ourselves out in service to others.
Yeah.
We analyzed how to place our anchor during sudden, violent storms.
The act of faith.
Yep. We talked about dropping the heavy backpack of resentment to survive betrayal. And finally, we look at tearing up our own personal scripts to accept the overarching master plan.
And to you listening right now, whether you are managing a team through a corporate crisis, dealing with a difficult family dynamic, or facing a personal health battle, the beauty of this deep dive is that these ancient teachings offer a deeply relevant blueprint.
They really do.
In a world that feels increasingly frantic and completely out of our control, this framework provides a practical way to navigate the chaos without losing your inner peace.
It really turns our modern survival instincts completely upside down.
Oh, for sure.
When we feel threatened, we usually think of resilience as building thicker, heavier armor to protect ourselves. We build emotional walls, we hoard our money and resources, and we hold on to our grudges to keep dangerous people away.
Right.
But looking closely at this text, true resilience actually requires the exact opposite. It requires softening your heart through radical service, unnatural forgiveness, and absolute surrender.
It's taking the armor off.
Exactly. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to mull over as you jump back into your day. We spend so much energy trying to forge better armor. But how might actively choosing to take your armor off change the way you approach the very next obstacle you face today? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.